Welcome back to Sacred Arts Channel, where we discuss all things from the practical to the sacred. One of the things that I have found so profound in my own awakening and development of gifts is the more I care for my body and myself, the deeper my self-worth and even my gifts transform. Today, we are talking to exercise physiologist Michelle Falzone about self-care, self-worth, and building body image. Michelle is a physiologist, online women's health and movement coach, and a graduate of York University, where she studied kinesiology. She also holds a certificate in wellness coaching from Humber College in Toronto. With 7 years of experience and a recent focus on coaching women, her personal struggles with body image and chronic pain drive her mission to encourage women to embrace strength training as a key lifestyle component, believing it fosters empowerment and contributes to a healthier world. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I loved how you started off with talking about how you are continuously growing and learning in order to support your own self-worth. So I think that's just such a beautiful segue to what we're going to chat about today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for presencing that. I also loved your bio because no words are truer than, embracing strength training as a key lifestyle component absolutely fosters empowerment and contributes to a healthier world. I myself, we just had a little conversation before this where I myself feel so empowered, so good. I feel like myself again in just doing that the strength training. What do you think is at the root when it comes to the prevalence of the lack of self-worth, and what steps can women take to cultivate a more positive self-view?
Yeah, I love that you actually started with the self-worth question. I think there's so much value in defining a lot of the terms that we're probably going to talk about today. And I believe self-worth is knowing that we are valuable human beings, worthy of love, worthy of existing, worthy of belonging, worthy of taking up space, which can feel uncomfortable for some women. And I think at the root of it is that we are enough, right? So once we have that definition of what self-worth is, what causes one self-worth to be high and one to be low? Now, I'm not a psychologist. I want to preface that with this conversation with that. Based on me being able to practice over the last 10 years, what I've come to realize that a lot of our self-worth is connected to our unresolved past experiences and emotions, right? Especially ones that result in setbacks or perceived failure. Could be non-optimal parenting, any type of trauma we've experienced from neglect, abandonment, abuse, assault. All these things really play a role in shaping who we are today. So when they go unresolved, unprocessed, it shapes who we are. And then we have these stories in our mind about who we are based on our experiences. And that's what we call self-talk, right? That is another common term that we have. So that's what I would say is at the root of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And lately, I myself have been going on this deep journey of when I listen to my self-talk. So it's because it's so automatic. I try to peel back the onion and say, like, where is this coming from? Where did I even start this belief or this, like, why am I even thinking this? And really peeling back that onion is really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. And that takes courage to ask yourself those questions. It takes awareness, first of all, and
Yeah.
then courage to dig deeper. And okay, we have this dialogue, we have this self-talk. What is the result of that self-talk? So I want to talk a little bit more about self-esteem, because our self-talk shapes our self-esteem. What is self-esteem? I believe it's the way we think, feel, and what we believe about ourselves, which, if we think about that, that directly impacts our self-worth. So these troubling experiences can really lead us to develop these limiting beliefs, kind of like what you mentioned of like, where did that belief come from? And you kind of travel back to your past. And these shape what we think about ourselves and the world. And then it changes our behavior at the end of the day. And our behavior includes the choices we make to take care of ourselves, and doing things that support or maybe not support our well-being. So I think the example that comes to mind is when I think about troubling experiences, especially living in a woman's body, it could be, and I hear this so often, it could be a girl at a young age who received messages from their mother or media about watching what they ate, or had their body commented on either when they gained weight or when they lost weight. Societal pressures as, let's say, an artistic athlete like a dancer or a figure skater. That puts a lot of pressure on women's bodies to adopt a certain image. And also all these little experiences, I shouldn't say little experiences, these experiences that we have the potential to lead us to do things like dieting, excessive exercise, and potentially eating disorders or body dysmorphia, which, much of these belief systems are connected to our childhood, and we bring it into adulthood because we just don't know any better, right? And I'm curious to know your perspective on this. Like, do you feel that if we were maybe taught to love and care for ourselves when we were younger, or have a different story in our mind about who we are and who we can be, do you think that could change our self-worth and our relationship to our body?
I kind of go back and forth on that because our experiences are just that. I kind of wish that we would all be taught on how to discern and how to be a little bit more, to be a lot more independent in terms of understanding that there's so much more than just one perspective. I think that some of that is planted in the sense of scholarly activities, right? Like critical thinking type of things, but not when it comes to like taking care of ourselves, taking care of our of who we are really, because a lot of what we're talking about here are things that we've learned as children, and we're only around family and school friends, right? Our peers and our family members are really what shape us into who we are as adults. But there's like this moment in time where we transition from being with our families and we venture out in the world, and now we're stuck with all of these old beliefs or beliefs that don't really belong to us, that just have come down from generation to generation. So I think that there's like this gap or somewhere in there where we're not taught like, hey, there's so many other perspectives, there's so many other ways to think about these things. And even like going deeper in like doing some shadow work or doing some sort of like emotional release, learning how to feel, learning how to release those old memories and old things as part of our process as children, I think that that would help us a lot, because I think that we're meant to experience certain things. We're meant to experience hardship and all the ranges of emotions. I don't think the answer is to be like sheltered or to have a different story. I think the answer is like to learn how to be self-sufficient and an independent kind of thinker, to be able to self-care for ourselves and take up that space, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. You kind of transported me to my first year of university in one of my classes, socio-cultural perspectives on kinesiology. The first lecture, we talked about the importance of asking why. Like that's something we ask as children very annoyingly of, why this, why this? And then we stop questioning it, after a certain age, and we just believe things to be true. So I like the word that you used of discerning. And how do we continue in childhood into adulthood to develop that mentality of not being afraid to question things, the world, question ourselves, and being able to take those pieces apart and understand what piece of this puzzle fits mine. And also being open for that to change, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of what we're talking about here is taking up the space to care for ourselves and to really get to know ourselves. What are some like common misconceptions women have, and how can they develop a self-care routine that genuinely nurtures both their physical and emotional?
Mm. I want to bridge the last question with this one. When we talk about being able to cultivate a positive self view, we talked a lot about, yes, our past trauma, our past experiences are important. I think before we dive into the whole wellness practices, can you accept who you are today and decide that a different future can exist for yourself? Because that shift in thinking is actually going to set the tone for anyone to develop habits that are going to sustain them in the long run. And I know it sounds so simple. You'd be surprised just that shift, what it can do in our body and in our mind. When we see things of like, you know what, yes, the past maybe wasn't your fault. Your present and your future is your responsibility, right? So that shift that you said of childhood to adulthood, supporting that transition. So when I think of self-care, again, I think it's important to define what is self-care. And like in the most layman way of saying it, I think of it as taking care of yourself, your mind, your body, your soul. I believe it's making choices that promote health, demote disease, and also help you actively manage illness when it does occur. So what does that look like? It could be food and drink choices, your movement behaviors, your sleep hygiene, stress management strategies, the people you hang around, limiting or avoiding drug and alcohol use. Like all these little things really have an impact on our well-being. And I want to pay closer attention to food and movement because I do think more women can relate to this in terms of we have to be careful with our relationship to these two things, because if we are using it as a means to change our body shape and size in an obsessive way to a point where it actually detracts us from living the quality of life that we want to, maybe affecting our mental, physical, and emotional, even relational health. We have to be very mindful of the choices we make and the ripple effect that it has. I also think self-care could be something on an annual basis, getting your pap smears, getting your mammograms after you're 45, going to the dentist, getting regular blood tests. So I really do think self-care is very, what's the word I'm looking for? All encompassing of many factors. And I also think, I'm curious to know your perspective on this, Jazzy. When it comes to self-care, I think we're heading into this idea of self-care is number one. And I do believe that is important. I also believe that community care is important. And what does that actually mean? We're social creatures. We actually thrive in community. So we know the effects, and the pandemic taught us that, of being, chronically lonely, socially isolated, feeling unworthy because maybe you don't have a solid friend group, or maybe you're not well connected to your family. People who experience these things can actually show higher inflammation, higher pain levels. It actually leads to the progression of aging more quickly. Our recovery is a lot slower. So I want to say, like, self-care is great. How can you also supplement your life with community care? Curious to know what your perspective is on that one.
Yeah, for me, self-care really is taking space for yourself, saying yes to yourself, saying know when it's appropriate, not overextending yourself. It's this whole concept of balance, right? If you go too much into isolation, you're now on the other end of the spectrum. But also, if you're out socializing all of the time and that's depleting your energy, then now you're on the opposite end of that spectrum. So, again, it goes back to balancing, having a really well balanced life. Like, I love being out in my community and being with people. But there are times where, like this past weekend, it was just like event after event after event. I even I wanted to spend time with my husband, so I went out and I golfed, but I really didn't want to do that. I even voiced it out loud, like I haven't had a day to myself in such a long time, right? But I still didn't. And so I noticed myself being on the other end of that spectrum. So again, I think self-care is all about having that balance and then listening to our internal self-talk and how we feel in the moment. Like if somebody's asking me if I should take them to the airport, if I could take them to the airport, like looking within myself and seeing, have I filled my cup enough? Do I have space for that? And not taking on that responsibility. I think it's all around boundaries. As
Yeah. Yeah. I really love that you filled the gap with that comment around boundaries. And that, especially women, we're taught to give, we're taught to nurture, we're taught to be there for people. So very common for women to people please, put themselves on the back burner and show up for someone else. And we know there are effects of doing that long term. And then I think that really is so helpful to lead in the discussion of the myths around self-care. And we talked about people pleasing. A lot of people think that self-care is selfish, right? I think that's like the number one myth that in coaching sessions that will come up. And again, I'm all about, let's define, what does selfish actually mean? And when you look at the definition, it says lacking consideration for others, right? So the beautiful thing is that when we take time for ourselves, you get sufficient rest, recovery, movement, whatever that is. You feel more energetic. You're less likely to you feel more energetic. You can show up for the people that you love, and you can actually bring a better version of yourself to that relationship, to that job, to that, I don't know, task on your list that you've been meaning to get done, that project. So I actually think self-care is actually one of the most selfless things that anyone can do. I saw something on Instagram the other day, and it was like something along the lines of, every parent says that they will die for their children. And you never hear parents say, oh, I would get healthy and stay healthy for my children, right? It's always like, when it comes to it, yes, I would take the shirt off my back. Well, what are you doing to support your own self-care? Even in the smallest accessible ways to you. So yeah, I would say that is like probably one of the top myths. What comes to your mind for a myth?
As far as myths, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the selfishness. That's what I talk about with my clients a lot. Like it might feel selfish. And then I love that you presenced the definition of selfishness. Because it really is, it's okay to take space. And a lot of the times I think it's about having permission, right? And so giving ourselves permission to take space, giving ourselves permission to fill up our cup. I like to use that analogy of like, I can't give unless my cup is runneth over, like unless I have extra to give. And that allows me to maintain my boundaries. It allows me to stay grounded. It allows me to stay true to myself. And then there isn't this whole fragmentation in my mind of like, oh, I'm giving up time and energy to be able to meet other people's expectations. I show up in my fullness and in my wholeness to be able to do that by taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I love analogies. I think that analogies are so important to help people shift their perspectives and getting them thinking about change. So I like making sure your cup is full. There's another analogy I also like that might resonate with your audience. I kind of made it up because I was just staring at a fire and I was like, there's something in this fire that I think we can learn. And imagine if you have maybe a fire with just some kindling wood. The flame is pretty small. What happens if you were to, I don't have, okay, let me just grab this. Let's say each of these pens were a stick or a log of wood. If you were to think of this stick, this pen, as a log of wood and a self-care activity, it could be meditation, journaling. You add that to the fire. This could be movement. This could be taking a bath. The more wood you add, the bigger the fire is going to get. The more fuel you have to give warmth, give light to others, and that has the ripple effect at the end of the day, right? So I always say, like, how many sticks are you adding to your fire this week? Or what does your fire look like, right? And I think that's, again, these little shifts are so powerful and just the way we think about ourselves. And I'm sure you can agree with this. It's one of those things that you can't really explain. It has to be experienced yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's so true. I heard, the self-care thing for years and years and years. And I'm like, yeah, like I go to the spa and, I take care of myself here and there. But really, until I started looking at it from a holistic perspective, really, truly saying yes to myself. And I stopped people pleasing and setting up those boundaries and going and getting the blood tests and making sure that I'm holistically in alignment with myself. Like I just didn't really understand what self-care was.
Maybe that's another myth we can debunk is self-care is not the same for everyone, right?
Right.
For
Yeah.
me, I don't enjoy massages. Like that's just not my thing. For me, it would be reading a book or maybe going for a walk. So I think also understanding that giving yourself space and permission to try different self-care practices. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant, like taking a day trip somewhere. It could be like, okay, can we try breath work? Can we do 5 deep breaths? How did that feel? Oh, and that's another myth. Self-care practices are temporary, right? It can help soothe you in the moment. It's in the long term, what you're doing is you're learning how to self-regulate your body,
Yep.
right? Which is so powerful because in a society where we're constantly in fight or flight, to be able to ground ourselves and handle different situations in a more calm, centered approach, you can imagine the ripple effect it has in your life by taking that approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to shift gears for a second and really dive into, some of the physical portion of our conversation today. So I see a lot of women now weightlifting and strength training, myself included. Can you speak a little bit about the physical and psychological benefits of this trend? And are there any myths to debunk there?
We should go out for lunch, Jassy. This conversation could be a long one. I encourage anyone who is interested in learning about the benefits of strength training. I developed I gave a webinar. This must have been earlier this year called Love It and Lift It. It's on YouTube. It's 45 minutes. We go over 14 benefits, both physical and psychological, that you'd be surprised on some of them. We'll talk about them today. You'd be surprised how many benefits can actually surprise us. Also, I'm on a mission to really promote strength training as a lifestyle change. I really hope this isn't like a trend that is kind of like the Jane Fonda of aerobics. Like I really hope for many generations, this is something that can stick. We can talk about physical, and I want to start off with the most common one that relates to my story and a lot of the stories that come up with the woman I work with. And increased strength and pain-free living is probably the number one most sought out physical benefit. Because when you strength training, you're actually conditioning your muscle groups. You're improving the neural connection from your brain to the muscle groups to perform a task. Basic movements like squats, lifting a weight up and off the ground, lunging, pulling, pushing. These are all making us functional on a day-to-day basis. So it really helps us decrease chronic pain because we're actually offloading our joints. We're creating stronger muscles, which decreases joint pain and then also makes us stronger to carry out our day-to-day. Muscle is a dense tissue. It needs a lot of energy to survive. So it actually, having more muscle increases our metabolism and decreases our risk of chronic disease. When we consume carbohydrates or any form of glucose that's even broken down and stored, first place it goes is actually our muscles. The second place it goes is our liver. The third place it goes is to our fat stores. So the more muscle we have, the more like insurance policy we have to consume calories and have it go to a place where it won't directly affect our body composition in the long term. Obviously, accounting for factors like sleep, diet is something to consider. When I talk about chronic disease, I talk about diabetes, right? Diabetes is when there is an unbalanced, irregulated, or not uncontrolled blood sugar in our body. And muscle has such an important role in being able to manage blood sugar. So from a quality of life perspective, not having to take metformin when you're, in your 60s, 70s to help manage your blood sugar is fantastic. And aerobic exercise and also strength training can help with that. Heart health. A lot of people don't know this, but when you lift weights, it actually improves certain blood markers. So we're talking about cholesterol. We're talking about triglycerides, blood sugar. We're talking about different types of cholesterol, the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. Those markers actually improve with strength training. And because this is an interesting one. This is what has been shown in the research over the last 10 years. When we strength train, we're increasing our grip strength. And our grip actually allows us to stay functional, to carry things, open a jar. And that has a direct effect on our ability to do our activities of daily living, especially into older adulthood, which if you think about the more functional you can be, the better your heart health is going to be. Improved immunity, longevity, right? We improve the number of white blood cells and proteins we have in our body when we strength train. Increased bone mineral density, super important for women to decrease their risk of osteoporosis and fractures. Improved mobility and joint health. So you're improving, let's say you want to improve your squat, improving your hip, your ankle mobility, your upper body mobility is going to help you stay more mobile and improve your strength in those positions, which improves your joint health. Improved health in motherhood with decreased risk of postpartum depression, decreased risk of high blood pressure. And your postpartum recovery is just much better because you have more muscle tissue, hormone balance. That is important, especially in peri and postmenopause, because strength training actually mimics the activity of estrogen, which is so interesting because that helps us regulate our hormones as they continue to stabilize beyond 50. Enhanced libido, right? We're able to release growth hormone when we lift weights, which can improve our sex drive, improves our cognitive function. So like brain health, being able to have more brain-derived neurotropic factors, which essentially helps our brain create connections and improves learning and memory and performance in sport. Like there's so many physical physical. That's just physical. We haven't even got to the psychological. And like I said, it's all on YouTube in a 45-minute conversation if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper. And I'm curious to know, you strength train. So maybe you can segue into this portion. What psychological benefits have you experienced from strength training?
I mean, it's not just strength training, right? It's like the food portion of it as well, I think is what really has me in a better mood. I'm a lot more clear. I'm able to sustain my energy a lot better. What I specifically did was I did cut out carbs and then I reintroduced them slowly after a certain amount of a certain period of time. Because I just don't think that that was sustainable either. Like I'm just like really well-rounded now, but in general, like I can hold my center better. I can ground easier. I have a much better mood at work. I'm able to have a lot more clarity. And even like in meditation, I feel like I go in deeper
Mm.
because of exercising and the food that I eat. Specifically in strength training, I feel like so good afterwards. Like I just like I think it's like a serotonin hit or something, but I feel like my skin is better, my mood is better, like everything all around. And so what I'm actually interested in, like you just listed off so many great benefits, so many things in being able to live a healthier, happier, more holistic life. So many great benefits. Why do you think that a lot of people don't do this?
I'm first off, I'm so glad you said, like, I essentially feel like an empowered badass woman. I feel alive, I feel centered, I feel connected to myself. Uh, just the depth of what you said is just so profound. So folks, if you're listening to that, if that didn't persuade you, we'll see what can. Why are people doing this, Jassy? Great question. I think there's I think as humans, we get very comfortable in status quo, whatever that is for us. Maybe we're scared to try something new. Maybe we have these, again, belief systems of, I'm going to injure myself. I'm going to get too bulky. The gym is too intimidating. Like these stories that we tell ourselves that we subconsciously put these blocks for us actually being able to engage in something that once you overcome that barrier, it is life changing. So I do think there are the myths. I do think having guidance is so important. Like you mentioned, having your coach has been so helpful for your progress. So I think it's the fear of getting uncomfortable, which we know growth is going to come when you can move past the discomfort. The myths and limiting beliefs we have. Yeah, I would say those are the top two. I'm not too sure if any others come to mind. What were you resistant at any point?
Oh yeah, my whole life. So I would lose weight and then I would gain it right back. And what I did different this time around was I looked at it a lot more holistically. Like I said before, it wasn't just the exercise, it was also the food, but also I was doing a lot of energy work. I was going down deep into my core belief system. And one of the core beliefs that came up was it's not safe to be thin, it's not safe to be small. And I noticed that as soon as like I hit my goal, I started going into fight or flight. And I think the thing that really supported me was the Reikis and the energy work that I was doing in order to, and right knowing how to regulate myself also through breath work, meditation, grounding, and before going off and just going for the food. Because what happened when I was a teenager, I was walking home from the library. The library was just like 3 blocks on a busy street. And I was walking home and, I was a very skinny girl back in the day, and someone tried to take me. Somebody tried to put me in their car, and I had never run so fast in my life. And I remember being at the kitchen table after that happened and feeling like I wasn't believed because they didn't see anybody. When I got to the door, I was like frantic. I like told my story of what happened, and they were like, well, no one's there now. And it was just kind of like brushed away. So I never dealt with that trauma. And so really dealing with it now in my 40s has been really interesting because it's like, oh, I didn't realize that I held on to that. And the conversation that I had with myself at the kitchen table, like, okay, well, one way to prevent this is to just be heavier. It wasn't like, oh, let me just strength train and gain more muscle. It was like, no, let's just be ugly and fat, and it's just not safe to wear mini skirts and to be thin. And so even though that was my desire in my 20s and in my 30s to like be at a healthy weight and be healthy, I would get there. That was never the problem.
Mm.
It was maintaining that. And so going back to those limiting beliefs and really understanding, and even like memories that we don't know, like certain things that spark this new attitude that we didn't even know that that's what happened in that moment.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is extremely traumatic. And I'm glad that you took a pause in your life and went back to that and processed it. Because if you didn't, your life could have been very different moving forward. So kudos to you for having the courage to work through that. So I'm curious to know, like, that belief, I cannot be safe. I am not safe in a smaller body. If you're open to sharing, what is your new belief that you have around your body?
Yeah, my new belief is that it's okay to be in a smaller body. I'm empowered. I have good judgment and discernment to be in situations where I will be safe. I now understand how to regulate myself, and that old version of me no longer, it exists in a previous version of me, but that is not who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you've done the work and you have completely reframed. And what do you think specifically helped enforce that new belief for you?
Yeah, so because I can feel when I'm slipping back, and every now and again, like, I will start eating and it's like, oh, okay, why am I eating? But it's going back to what you said in the beginning, is asking the why. Why am I going for the fridge? Why am I going for the carbs? What is happening here? Oh, I'm not regulating. I'm in fight or flight. Oh, this
Mm.
old belief is creeping up, because we can unravel these old beliefs and replace them with new beliefs. But guess what? Our body still remembers
Yeah.
and reverts back. So it's having that practice. So it's that mindfulness, but also the energy work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I do Reiki every month on myself, or I go to a practitioner, or I go to a shamanic practitioner and do alignments. I do core belief work and shadow work, really, like what is happening, what is triggering this, because something might trigger it. Like my mom might say something that just puts me right back there,
Yeah.
in a former state, and it's like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to go for the donuts right now. Let me see if I could do some breath work. Let me wait this craving out and do something that is conducive to resetting my nervous system, and see how I feel in 24 hours.
Mm.
And if I'm still feeling it in 24 hours, maybe I'll try something different, or I'll just go ahead and fulfill my craving, and then I'll go and do something new in terms of like going to the gym for an extra 15 minutes or whatever the case may be. Sometimes I do like to indulge my cravings, but it's all about like asking that why and having that mindfulness.
Thank you for saying that. Like, when we have cravings, it's our body's way of saying that we perhaps are lacking a nutrient. Maybe it could be a little bit of an emotional soothing. I know sometimes when I've had a tough week, I'm just like, I want to go out for gelato. And I know if I have 1, 2, 3 scoops, I know I am enjoying this. Right. And I think giving us ourselves permission to enjoy while releasing the guilt, the shame that might sometimes subconsciously is attached to that, like that's improving your relationship to food and to yourself. Right. So it sounds like, and you highlighted a very important concept, Jassy. You talked about things are going to come up. And I think that's valuable for your audience to hear of like, this is not just a one and done. Like things are going to come up, they're going to challenge you, and it's not there. It's coming up in your best interest because it wants you to actually address whatever is coming up so that you can be a better version of you. So even that mindset shift of like, oh, I'm slipping up. Are you slipping up, or what is this actually trying to teach you?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
It's also an opportunity to practice the new habits. It's an opportunity to look at what am I learning here? What is it? Why is it still coming up for me? Type of thing. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you have, practitioners and practices in place where, okay, I know this is coming. Let me go head to my care team, my care practices, and work through this. So kudos to you for being able to do that.
Thank you. I'm curious, besides physical fitness, what other elements of wellness should women focus on to ensure a holistic approach to their health, especially in challenging, patriarchal norms?
I know we touched on physical, and then okay, so I think the psychological aspects, if we touch on them now, can actually lead into a better discussion around that one. So you talked about like feeling unstoppable, essentially, when you go to the gym. And I really do think what lifting weights teaches us is that we can do hard things, right? And this skyrockets our confidence because it shows ourselves that we are capable. A big component of my program is because my program is only 4 months, they can like clients can continue if they choose. My goal is to create skillful movers. So mastering movement, mastering all of the basic movement patterns, because that is actually what breeds a sense of confidence. You probably can attest to this of like when you learn a new skill and you have progress and you feel like, okay, I'm a gym goer. I know how to strength train. It just has a different energy when it comes to how you show up. And then we can also talk mental health, right? When you lift weights, you have to be connected to your body, right? If you're not lifting with intention, that is when you can potentially hurt yourself. So it can breed a mindfulness practice, improves your relationship to your body, right? When we lift weights, we actually have the opportunity to shift our focus to performance and away from aesthetics. So using movement to change our body, which can help heal our relationship with our body. And then improved relationship to movement and nutrition. I'm not too sure if you experience this. When you start strength training, your appetite goes up. You're fueling your metabolism. So I think that is such an amazing opportunity to learn how to honor your hunger cues and then also your fullness cues, and to also think about how can you fuel your body for performance versus changing your body shape. Because you cannot go to the gym and you cannot, continue to progress in the gym if you're not fueling your body accordingly. So with those psychological benefits in mind, when we think about being able to navigate this world as an empowered woman within the patriarchal structure that exists, again, when we think of patriarchal norms, what is that? So most often we think of the gender roles in family and society and in our careers, right? So when we think about being able to navigate those situations, I think it goes back to your point of being okay with taking up space. Even like women just knowing and believing that they're worthy of taking space with their presence, with their voice, helps us to effectively communicate and develop these wellness practices. And that's kind of what strength training taught me, and many of the clients I've worked with, is I am capable, I can lift this weight, aka I can have this difficult conversation with a man, with whatever that is. I am worthy of taking up space. When it's a crowded gym, there's one like all the squat racks are taken, going up to that one person, hey, when are you done your sets? I'd love to jump in after you, right? And I also think allyship with other women and men can actually, when we're willing to have these deeper conversations, can promote wellness with all genders. Yeah, I'm curious to know your thoughts in terms of navigating wellness in the patriarchal structure.
Yeah, I think I think it's very similar to managing ourselves in the corporate world in such like a patriarchal structure as well. I think it's all about voicing what's not okay and what is okay. It's about taking that space. It's about showing up as our most authentic self and are both masculine and divine. Because I think a lot of the times what happens is we try to go too on the masculine side and match that energy.
Yes.
And that has its own consequences. And I think it's about balancing both within, and I think that's a call for men to also do the same. I have had so many beautiful experiences with men that do try to balance both their feminine and masculine. But in this world, it's mostly masculine still. I mean, we're going through a shift where we're coming into this divine feminine. And but I just don't think we're there yet. And yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you in terms of like showing up and as our most authentic selves and finding that balance.
Yeah, yin and yang. There's a reason why it exists.
Ah, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to go back a little bit on our discussion on self-confidence because you mentioned it just recently. And, we are in such a world where there's a lot of mixed messages in terms of how we should behave, how we should look. What can we do as women to be able to foster self-confidence?
So I did a webinar on menopause probably 3 months ago, and one of the members or attendees ended up booking a call after the webinar. And I asked her what stood out to her the most. And she says, Michelle, like, it is very clear I am not living my life in accordance with my core values. So I really do think self-confidence starts with getting clear on what your values are and then taking steps to behave in alignment with those values. So when we talk about building confidence, using actionable strategies is even taking 5-10 minutes, writing out your core values, and then seeing, what evidence do you have of what you're of how you're actually living or not living in those core values is the first step. And then being mindful of those internal stories, which, you and I have already talked about quite a bit, because we'll always default to our most current story. So if our current story isn't serving us, then there needs to be some belief system work, some energy work that we can unpack a little bit more so that we can change our narrative, which allows us to create that news story. And the news story, part of this process, and this isn't like step 1, step 2, like there are different ways of approaching it depending on where the client is at. When we create the news story, now is when we start making choices and implementing habits that support our values and our beliefs, right? Our most truest values to ourselves. So for example, if you value health, it could be maybe getting off our phones before bed so that we can get a restful sleep. Maybe another example is common for women. You know, if we're constantly trying to change our body and it begins to impact our mental health, our relationships, our physical health, is chasing this body actually something that supports your value of health, right? Because the mind is always going to search for evidence of your new thoughts and beliefs and if they're true. So if we keep on feeding the beliefs that are limiting us versus supporting us or encouraging, empowering us, then that's something to be mindful of. One of the most simplest ways to build confidence is keep a promise to yourself. Okay, so if you say like, I'm going to put my phone away before bed, create systems that help support that and keep that promise to yourself. Because as soon as you ignore the alarm you have to get off your phone, you're actually dishonoring yourself. You're abandoning the person that you're trying to become, which makes it harder to keep going, which is very important to keep the promises achievable, right? If you're not going to the gym and you're like, I'm going 4 days a week, I'm going to keep this promise to myself. Are you setting yourself up for success?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I would say, and this is probably one of the most important, is focus on progress and small wins, right? Actually, a client I had this morning, this is her 3rd week. Her and I are working together. She actually started the session. She's like, I only went to the gym once. And I'm like, only? You went to the gym once, right? So how can we cash that in as a win and as a form of progress? Because a month before we were working together, the gym wasn't even in your routine. So how can we continue to cultivate these wins and focus on progress instead of perfection? Yeah. What are your thoughts on all that in building confidence?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you said is very similar to how I teach boundaries, right? And with like when you have really healthy boundaries, your self-esteem goes up, your self-confidence goes up. You are able to hold your center a lot better. You're able to keep promises to others and yourself, and all those things. So those are, I wholeheartedly believe that those are great ways to build your self-confidence. And the first place to do that is by honoring yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And doing the things that you say you're going to do. I used to say, it's a high say do, right? But also on the flip side of that, I love that you presenced, actually, setting yourself up for success. I have had clients, I've had friends even that, overcommit themselves, and then they're really upset and disappointed when they don't do what they said that they were going to do. And it's like, well, you set up these outrageous goals that is not even humanly possible. And so really understanding, or focusing on how to cultivate that skill of setting up successful and smart goals is really important to do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you made me think of, okay, how do you put up Christmas lights outside your home? You use a ladder, right? No one jumps like 3 steps up the ladder to go. No, it's like, what's the next easiest step so that you can get to what you're ultimately trying to achieve? So making that bite size, and what you'll notice is that fuels motivation. It's like, okay, I did that 1 step. I can do this. I can do that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the momentum that we can really benefit from, and especially in the long run.
And I also love how you said it again here too. It's about celebrating your wins, right? So many of us are so focused on what we didn't do or what we didn't accomplish or what is still left to accomplish. And very seldom do we ever look at what did we actually accomplish, and actually stay in that vibration of like, we had this win. As soon as we win it or we accomplish something, then we're moving on to the next thing. And it's about, like, again, that mindfulness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I absolutely agree.
I'm curious, can you share your personal story or experience when you started embracing wellness and how it helped you, how you've, coached yourself through it and maybe even confronted some of the societal expectations or patriarchal challenges, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah. This is actually this is a deep question. I feel like I haven't really openly shared unless you come to one of my webinars. When I first started working with women, I was very hesitant to actually do it because I had the story in my head of, oh, here's a thin white woman preaching wellness and all this stuff. Like, and that's like something that I was scared of because I thought people would have these stories about me of who I am, and just having the same stories that are already out there about people who live in smaller bodies. And what I really want to encourage people to think of in all body sizes is that everyone, no matter what body you live in, whether you're a model, whether you live in a larger body, whatever body shape you have, we all have different experiences, from bullying, teasing, shame, assault, illness, injury. Like, I've experienced a lot of those things. And I think as a society, if we can help people think of, or help people move away from judgment and more of like just seeing the human being in front of you and understanding that there's so much more to someone, like that their body will never be able to show or explain. I think that's so powerful, because as a collective, we can actually shift the focus to, can we just be loving, kind, supportive, engaged human beings in our life? So, because that's what really matters, right? At the end of the day, we can change our body so much. Do we feel worthy? Do we feel connected? Do we feel loved? Right? And I just want to encourage like people to carry that lens whenever they interact with anyone in their life. So I think that's what I would share.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Can you tell our listeners about your offerings and where they can reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram, Pivot Your Wellness. I'm also on Facebook, on YouTube, LinkedIn. So feel free to search up some of my resources on YouTube. Lots of fun content on Instagram, and potential offering. If you would like to, you can book a complimentary coaching session, and 60 minutes. I'm all about providing enough value and education so that you can move the needle at least 1%. All right. We're here to cash in any wins that we can with your wellness, and we want to see you win. So I would love to offer your audience that, and we can provide all the links and all that fun stuff for that as well. And I just want to thank I want to thank you for your time, your provocative questions, or provocative, not provocative, and your listeners for taking time out of their day to share this experience with us. I hope, listener, if there's anything that resonated with you, reach out to Jassy, myself. We'd love to know if this conversation has impacted you in any way. And if there's any way she and I can support you in your journey, I know we'd be more than willing to. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The links will definitely be down below. If anything resonated with you, or you're going through your own wellness journey now, we would love to hear about it in the comments below. Drop an emoji to let us know how you felt about this episode, and I will see you on the next one.